so people don't get mad at me. But just a couple things, as always, for Zoom. For those, I know the majority of you have been on these in the last couple of weeks, but if you haven't, you can mute yourself on the lower left. That would be great. If we do hear any background noises, we will mute you. But if you could do that, that'd be great. And then if you do have questions throughout, feel free to unmute yourself and ask them, or you can type them in the questions or comment or chat box at the bottom of the page if you see that on Zoom. So looking forward to a good discussion today. We got a couple of good topics, things that come up a lot that are somewhat confusing. But before we did get started on that, I wanted to clarify one thing from last week. One thing from last week, sorry, just we talked about the very end about obstacles behind the green, and I think one of the things I said, it was not 100% clear, but I think you know, we should clarify, is this last bullet point here, is that obstacles that exist only behind the green should be downgraded, applying the B1 adjustment. So it doesn't, you don't always apply the B minus adjustment, but what it's saying here is it's only when the obstacles exist only behind the green. So if you have something like the discussion we had a little bit after people left, we had we talked about, if there's something in front of the green, then you're purposely trying to hit over it. So we shouldn't be discounting over the green in that scenario, because we're purposely trying to hit over something in the front of the green. So if you do put the B minus in there, you're only going to do it automatically if the only obstacle is behind the green. So, and then another thing just to keep in mind when we are going through this, I mean, there are going to be things that we have to read over once or twice to really understand. Because if I didn't really read that through, or Mike DeWitt didn't bring it to my attention, we would have kind of skipped over it. So it's really important to read the words as they are on the page and interpret them, you know, exactly how they are on the page. Because if we miss a word or two, it can make a big difference in how we apply it. All right. So today we're going to cover a couple things in section 6 and section 7, and then get into a few of the obstacles that we talk about. And then I will also have, for some of you, it'll be the first time that you've seen a Form 1, but we'll also do some Form 1 work where we'll go in and fill some values in. You'll have to excuse my poor handwriting, but it'll be helpful for a lot of you. So section 6 talks in the book, course rating system guide. If you don't have it, get it. You can buy it on our volunteer website. Again, you won't be able to rate without it, so you need to have it. But our policy is that we rate every tee for men. So whether it's 7,000 or 4,000, we're going to put a rating together for men. And then for women, we rate everything up to 6,000 yards. And in many cases, we will do tees beyond that. But the USGA software that they provide us has the ability for us to do what we call computer rate for any tee that is over 7,000 yards or longer for men, or 6,000 yards or longer for women. Or on the short end of things, any tee that's 4,800 yards or shorter for men, or 4,000 yards or shorter for women. So we basically, our policy is that if a golfer plays at a course that has an active rating in Michigan, they should be able to post their score regardless of what tee they play, whatever their gender is. So that's why we have this policy. And then we have the ability, if we rate up to 6,000 yards for women, we have the ability to put together ratings if there are people that play longer tees, which does happen from time to time with some of the college players or stronger amateurs, high school players, good high school players as well. And then there is currently a minimum yardage requirement for rating. If the course is less than 3,000 yards for 18 holes or 1,500 for 9 holes, it can't get a rating. So, for example, a par 3 course cannot have a course and slope rating. This is something that the USGA is working on, that they're trying to incorporate shorter courses, par 3 courses into the World Handicap System. So nothing that's going to happen in the next year or two, but possibly in 2024 or later, we might see some of these courses being brought into the mix and being rated. And then we'll also run into, when we're out there, you know, a lot of the courses in Michigan are your typical, you know, par 70, par 71, par 72, but there's also a handful of par 63s and par 60s and par, you know, 67s. Those can be rated as well, and so you might find yourself on one of those rates during the summer as well. All right, so a couple things. When we are on course, there are references to elevations, green speed, and green surface ratio. These are all things that will be handled by our measuring team. It'll be denoted on our form 1, but it's not something that you're going to have to be required to do as a rater when you're rating the golf course. These things will be gathered for you. The one exception is when we talk about topography and we talk about elevation from our landing zone to the green. That may be something that our rating team needs to evaluate on site that day. But tee to green elevations, the green speed, rough height, green surface ratio, those will all be measured in advance, and you won't need to worry about getting those on the day of the rate. It'll be on your form 1, and you'll be good to go. Not saying that you shouldn't, you know, double check them. I know a lot of times on the elevations, especially on the par 3s, just double check that it's, you know, if it's a minus, it actually is downhill as opposed to a plus being uphill. All right, the other thing that all right, sorry, just trying to find that background noise there. I think we got it. All right, so I'm going to read a couple of things here that are important when we're looking through things. It says here that they should consider the likelihood of obstacles coming into play and the difficulty of recovery when necessary. And they should be guided by what will probably happen, not by the extremes of what could happen. So when we're thinking about, we're rating certain obstacles, when we're going down the hole, we need to think about what likely will happen or what will probably happen, not by what happened one time when you played, or if I hit this slope, it will kick, you know, 15 yards this way, but I have to hit a perfect shot to land exactly in that spot to do that. We're talking about probability and the likely scenario happening, not just one extreme outlier that could happen, plus, you know, negative or positive. When we are putting values on the form 1, we should wait until we've seen all the features on the hole. So typically you won't write your final rating values down until you're on the putting green, once you've been able to see and view the entire hole. And then as we move forward throughout our rating process, we want to compare to what we've seen on earlier holes, right? So we, you know, when we're looking at certain obstacles and we're evaluating difficulty, if it's, you know, significant, extreme, or moderate, or minor problems, things of that nature, we want to consider other holes and say, well, you know, if we said the last hole was a moderate problem and the trees on this next hole are easier than that, then we need to go down a level, because we want to keep that in mind.
Here, now that one will come apart, so don't try to take that one apart. I know how to take that one apart because that one's got slits in it.
Well, here,
No, it's got slits going down. You can bend the paper and the slits open up.
there you go.
The blue paper doesn't have that.
All right, got him. Sorry about that. All right. So then the next thing here, pace of play, or as I like to call it, an experienced, efficient rating team should take about 4 hours to rate an average 18-hole golf course. So when we are out there, we want to make sure that we're moving at a good pace. When we schedule the ratings with the golf course, we tell them that we rate at the pace of play. So we want to make sure that we are keeping that promise that we give to the course, and we want to make sure we're moving. We're not trying to break any speed records. And yeah, that they're, you might run into a group that are the morning normal group out there that plays in 3 hours. You might have to let them through. But we do our best to keep it at about the pace of play. Again, here saying about 4 hours for an average 18-hole course. When we go out and rate, we are rating, 95% of the time we will go out and rate only 9 holes. So there'll be a team on the front and a team on the back. And so, it should be somewhere in the 2 to 2.5 hour time frame to rate, depending on the golf course. And then in the book, it talks about after rating, it's highly recommended that we play the golf course for greater insight. And after playing the course, the team may decide to modify some of the obstacle ratings. Really, when you are playing, we want you to enjoy it. It's definitely a perk of the process. But if there are certain things that you notice, definitely let the captain know. Things that you saw out there. But don't feel like you have to not enjoy your round because the book is telling you need to look at all this stuff super in depth. We want you to enjoy playing. It's a nice benefit of this process. But if you do happen to notice something that you didn't notice before, it's good to let the captain know so we can make some minor adjustments. And typically a majority of the adjustments that we make after playing are very minor, or things that might apply to a handful of holes, not necessarily a bunch of them. All right, section 7. So here are things that are covered, effective plane length corrections that are covered in section 7. So just as a kind of a precursor, length, for those of you, you've probably heard this before, for those of you that have done this, but length is the most important factor in determining the course and slope rating. So when we measure the golf course, it's an extremely important process. But also all of these adjustments that we do that affect the actual plane length of the hole are extremely important. So we need to make sure that we're doing them right, and that we put a minus when it should be a minus, and we should put a plus when it should be a plus, and we make sure we adjust our appropriate approach shot lengths. And we'll show you that here in a second on some examples in Form 1s. But these effective plane length corrections are extremely important. So for us to keep that in mind, that we really want to focus really hard on these ones, because they do matter a lot when it comes to the outcome of the rating. As I think we've talked about before, there are a few things on here that we don't really deal with, altitude being one. All of our courses in Michigan are below the altitude level that the book takes into consideration. So that's something we don't need to worry about. If you did happen to rate in Colorado or somewhere like that, then you can learn it there. But in Michigan, we don't need to worry about that. We'll touch briefly on wind, but wind is something that we don't really do on the golf course. It's something that's handled kind of by the captain. And then we'll talk about these 3 other corrections here: roll, dogleg, force layup. So roll is an adjustment for sorry, I'm just all right. I think the background noise stopped for now. So, all right. So roll, when we're looking at roll, if you look at roll in your book, you'll see that we're looking at basically two things when it comes to roll. We're looking at a full tee shot and any subsequent full shot. But it's important to notice that when you look at the chart for roll, that this chart and these numbers here are specifically talking about tee shot. Okay. And then our subsequent shots are handled with this two adjustment that we'll get to in a little bit. I think that's something to keep in mind. A lot of folks don't quite, because I believe in a previous edition of this, we looked at the cumulative effect of roll when we were applying these numbers, but now it's specifically a tee shot. So a couple things that affect roll include the fairway slope or tilt. So the example in the book here is a ball hit to a downhill landing zone rolls farther than one hit into an upslope. We're looking at fairway firmness, and we're looking at landing zones that aren't cut to fairway height. So sometimes, your bogey offer, or maybe even scratch offer in some cases on some tees, will not reach the fairway with their shot. In those cases, we want to look at the roll, because obviously the ball's not going to roll as far if it hits in the rough versus if it hits in the fairway. In terms of firmness, that's something that we don't necessarily look at a ton, but and kind of the one reason that is the case is because we are, again, when we're rating these golf courses, we're rating them for a 10-year cycle. So we want to keep in mind that, just because there was a recent weather event, maybe their course got an inch or 2 inches of rain the couple days before we were there, and it's soft. We don't want to necessarily say that it's soft all the time. So the fairway firmness and things like that would be something that the captain would be communicating with the golf course about, or you might have someone that accompanies us on the rate that plays the golf course a lot and can give us insight into, oh yeah, that fairway is significantly harder than all the others, or this spot is always wet because it sits in a floodplain, and you're never going to get your full 20 yards of roll in this scenario here. So those are all things that we would look at, but it is something that, again, we don't want to necessarily evaluate 100% only on the day that we're there. We want to look at over the course of 10 years, is this firm or soft when we look at it from a longer term perspective. When we're looking at roll, we assume that there's an average of 20 yards of roll. So when we talked about the approach or the yardage or the shot lengths in the last session, we talked about, the ball hits 20 yards or hits 20 yards short of how far we hit the ball. So for the scratch male golfer, it's 250. So it hits on the ground at 230 and then rolls at 20 yards out. And then for females, it's different, and bogey players different versus scratch players. I think you all remember that chart, but we're assuming an average of 20 yards of roll. Now, the other thing when we're looking at making the roll adjustments, we need it to be significant enough to get outside of even beyond that 20 yards. So it needs to go outside of 15 and 25 yards. So we're assuming that in some cases it's going to go 15, some cases it's going to go 25, but we're averaging 20. So one way to look at that, and when we put this chart together last year, it caused a lot of commotion, but I think we got it better now. So one way to think about roll is that you have this grace period marked by these two black diamonds, where the ball can roll out anywhere from 15 to 25 yards, where you don't make any adjustments. The only time you would make adjustments, again, on a full tee shot, would be when it goes shorter than 15 yards or longer than 25. And so you can see here kind of how we have it is that this is the length that it rolls out up top, and then below is the adjustment. So when we're talking about making these adjustments, minuses and pluses, it's always good to keep in mind that when we put a minus on the form, whether we talk about layups or doglegs or sorry, doglegs or roll, we're always making the course shorter. So when we make the course shorter, we use a minus. When we make the course longer, whether it's a layup or a dogleg or roll, we use a plus and make the course longer. So because the ball doesn't roll as far, roll up to the 15 to 25 grace window that we have, we're going to add a +1 in this case.
He's explaining it much better than he did.
Well, the chart is kind of self-explanatory.
Oh, it is, yeah. Ball hits the ground.
Yep. So, I think you know, when we're looking at this, so just running through a couple more examples. So when we go back to our chart and we're saying that we're putting a +2 down for our full tee shot, we're saying that the ball is going to hit the ground and only roll 5 yards. Okay. If we went to a +4, at that point, we're saying that the ball literally hits and rolls backwards. Okay. So you don't see a ton of +4s. You see some +3s, but you're going to have some significant upslope or something that's going to make this happen. And you know, sometimes you will see that maybe more so on second shots to raise greens. But when we talk about second shots, we're not necessarily applying all these numbers 1 to 4. Okay, and then likewise, if we hit a downslope and it goes forward farther, then we're going to use a minus number here. So again, I just want to reiterate that when we're talking about this, when we look at these -1, -2, -3, and 4, and all these 1 to 4 values, we're looking at tee shot. Now we get into the subsequent or second shots or a subsequent shot, but it still needs to be full shot. Then we're going to put this 2 adjustment. So the 2 adjustment is just going to be a +1 or a -1, and it can happen anytime we did it. So maybe it's a 3-shot hole and we would have two adjustments. Sorry, it would need to be a 4-shot hole for that to happen. But so it could happen multiple times because we have that little star or asterisk next to adjustment, which means that it's shot specific. Okay, but you might have on your second shot, and this is where it gets a little confusing, you might have on your second or subsequent full shot, you might have a situation where the ball does go more than 5 yards, right? But we're still only applying a +1 and -1 for the second or subsequent shot. But when we do have that scenario, we're going to make sure we get the right yardage on our Form 1. So let me pull up a Form 1 here. So we might have a scenario where, and let's just, I guess really quick, just want to preface, I think this first time we kind of showed a Form 1 for some of you folks. So this is what you'll get when you get to the golf course. It'll be assigned to you, and you'll have, you know, your tee color there, your gender there. It'll have a few other pieces of information that aren't listed here, rough height, stent meter. But basically, when we're looking at roll, we're looking at this section right here. And if we talk about the first hole, and we're talking about a subsequent, let's just do a subsequent shot for now. If I have a subsequent shot and I'm going to have a roll adjustment, let's say that it's going to hit into, in this case here, the tee to green elevation is showing us minus 160 feet. So pretty significant. So let's say that we're going to have a downhill adjustment for roll, but it's going to be on our second or subsequent shot. So we're going to put a 2 in here, 2+, or 2 asterisks or whatever we want to say. And that's going to be our adjustment there. But when for our value, it's going to end up being, sorry, and we said it was downhill, right? So we want it to be a minus. So for our actual final value, it's going to end up being a -1. But for our approach shot here, because we're going downhill and we're saying that the ball is going to roll out more, and we're going to say it's going to be 10 yards more than normal. I know we're putting a lot out here. But then we're going to cross this out, make it 73 for our now adjusted approach shot length. So even though if we look at this chart here, even though we say that the ball went 10 yards more, we're not using a -2 because it is a subsequent shot and not the tee shot. If we had the same -10 on the tee shot, this would be a -2 here instead of a -1. But because it was a subsequent shot, we have this 2 adjustment.
Hey, Kyle.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Glenn Santelises. Just a question on the adjusted approach shot. Do we show the -1? Do we show the -1 or the -2 any other place for the tee shot, or do we just adjust the approach shot 10 yards?
Yeah. Good question. So let me just clear this drawing here and then we'll put a new one in. So if it's a tee shot, and let's just say we have the same scenario here, the tee shot, because it hits on a downslope and it's 160 feet downhill, it's going to roll out 10 yards beyond our 25 or 15 to 25 yard range. In that case, we'd have a -2 adjustment here. And then our shot that was supposed to go 250. Geez, Glenn, now you're making me do all this math. 303.
303. Yeah.
Yep. So 303. So then our next landing zone that we would look at would be 293.
Right.
And then eventually that would end up changing this to 73.
Correct.
Yep.
And then
Yeah.
what Mark had told me also is you'd have the -2 there, and then next to it for the subsequent shot you'd have the 2 asterisk next to it, correct?
Yeah. So if we had, so let's talk about that example. So let's say it's 10 yards on the first shot and 10 yards on the second shot, both downhill. In that case, what you would do is you would have that 2 adjustment here. And then your final value would actually be -3. So you probably erase that -2. Always use a pencil with an eraser.
Right.
You'd probably erase that -2, put -3, and then this would end up turning into 63. Good question. All right. Yep, and then Mike brought up a good point. When you do make that adjustment to your approach shot, make sure that you are looking up your green target value, which we'll cover to do in a later session. But when you do make an adjustment, you need to relook at your value, because for those of you that have done this before, you know that there's a standard value from the table, but whenever our approach shot changes, we want to make sure we have the right number with the changes. All right, there are a few other questions here. Second shot roll rating to a green issue, would that be only on shots that would be in a transition zone issue? Not necessarily. So you could have a scenario that maybe, I can't think of any specific hole, but maybe you have a hole that has a very elevated green, and it's down at the very bottom, it's about, let's say, 60 yards, and then it just goes straight uphill to the green and maybe goes up 20 or 30 feet. If I hit midway up that hill, the ball's never going to go or roll 20 yards forward. So it could end up staying there on the hill, or it could roll back. But that would be another case or a scenario where I might not have an actual transition zone. I might be or should be 40 yards short of the green, but 40 yards short of the green doesn't allow me any roll because of that steep slope. There was another question about the roll adjustment because you're more likely using a lofted club, or what is the rationale? So basically what we're saying is that there are certain circumstances on the golf course that will make the ball roll outside of that 15 to 25 yard window. Typically, it's not necessarily the club that you're hitting. It's more of the conditions that you encounter in that area. So whether it's uphill, downhill, rough or fairway height, sometimes you'll see if you're hitting from a very elevated spot, sometimes the ball won't roll as far if it's low going into a flat area because it plugs, or it just gravity has so much impact on the ball that it just doesn't allow it to roll that normal 20 yards if you're hitting from a flat or from level from the tee. But typically we're just looking at the area where we're supposed to land, where the ball is supposed to hit the ground, and evaluating there to determine if there is a roll adjustment. I would say in general, there's not, you probably will run into, one or two roll adjustments a rate. So it doesn't happen a ton. And if you're in places, we always joke about pretty much almost every course in Macomb County is as flat as a pancake. And if you're rating in Macomb County, you probably don't need to worry about roll too much. But there are other places in northern Michigan or other parts of the state where you are going to have this come into play more often than not. All right. So I think we covered pretty much the couple examples that I wanted to talk about. Just important that we are correcting our approach shot length when we do roll, and that we keep in mind that when we look at this table, anything beyond, or if it's not a tee shot, the only adjustment we can use is this 2 adjustment, which is only puts it plus or minus 1, even though the yardage might end up being more than that, plus or minus 1 or 5 yards. So just keep that in mind. All right, any questions before we move on? Okay. All right, we talked about that. All right, doglegs and forced layups. So the book says here a dogleg correction is distinctly different from a forced layup. Both situations may add yardage and change the effective playing length of the hole, but a dogleg may also subtract yardage if a player is able to cut the corner of a dogleg. So if it's a layup, it's always going to be a plus. If it's a dogleg, it could be a plus, it could be a minus. More often than not, you'll see pluses for doglegs, but it can be a minus in some cases. Okay, and then we're evaluating these separately for the bogey and scratch players. And then if we do have a layup by choice, there is not going to be a length correction on our Form 1 for that. Or sorry, there won't be a length correction or a number put in the layup section if it's a layup by choice, but we still will update our approach shot length, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So let's start with dog legs. So when we're talking about dog legs, you'll see when you read in the book, you'll see a reference to a pivot point sometimes. So I just want to explain really quickly what that is. That pivot point is how we measure the golf course, how the USGA wants us to measure it for course rating purposes. And basically, what we do when we measure is we measure the hole straight without any dog legs, and we go to the point where it pivots and goes in the other direction. So in this dog leg case here, this red point here is our pivot point, and then our next one will go up towards the green here. We typically will measure to the front and the back of the greens, so we have an effective middle of the green. But that's kind of how we determine the pivot point, and there could be multiple pivot points on the hole. If this were to dog leg, over to the left here, we could have another pivot point here. But in this case here, we just have kind of one pivot point. All right. So again, we'll have a plus when we're making the hole longer and a minus when we're making it shorter. So if we can't, going back to our picture here, if our shot is supposed to take us 250 yards or 210 yards or whatever the appropriate shot length is, if it takes us into the trees here, we're not going to hit it straight into the trees. The dog leg's going to force us to hit it shorter. And so we're going to have a dog leg plus adjustment because we're making the hole longer, because we're hitting shorter club, and then we'll have a longer next shot into the hole or into the next landing zone. Okay, and then there is a note in here. We don't run into this a ton, but there is a note about if you have a 90-degree angle dog leg, and basically all that's saying in the book here is that if you do have a 90-degree dog leg, if you hit it farther forward, it just takes you farther away from the hole. So it's not really 100%. It does. I shouldn't say 100. It doesn't come up a ton, but if you did have a 90-degree dog leg, it'll be treated a tad bit differently than a normal dog leg, where you have a little bit of extra room to hit it farther, to hit it past the pivot point and still get closer to the hole. All right, so when it talks about a pivot point here, it's probably best just to show this example. So what that bullet point is saying is that if my golfer hits it 200 yards and 200 yards from the tee is right here, I don't have a dog leg because I don't hit it far enough. But if 250 is up in the trees here, then I will. So it's pretty common sense statement. The other thing too, when you're evaluating any type of dog leg, you're trying to figure out where the person is going to end up on this dog leg. In this example here, we're not always 100% going to hit to the quote unquote pivot point. If we have an opportunity to hit the ball a little bit farther and still get closer to the hole, we're going to take advantage of that. But again, keep in mind that we hit a straight shot. So in this case here, we can't assume that we can play a right to left shot and try to advance it farther down this way. We're going to hit it to probably somewhere in this neighborhood, or maybe kind of right where these dots are. And then that would be where we determine our dog leg adjustment from there. And so really the math behind it is fairly straightforward. So if on my sheet, I'm supposed to, let me see if I can pull up the sheet here. If on my sheet, I'm supposed to be at, we'll use hole 2 here in 150 yards. If I'm supposed to be at 150 yards, but I can't be at 150 yards, and now I'm at 170 yards away from the hole, then my dog leg adjustment is going to be 20. So if that's the case, I'm going to cross this out, right, 170. And then I'm going to put under here in the dog leg section 20. And then likewise, if it's negative, and I'll wait to do the negative one because negative one can be a little confusing. So the other thing when we have a dog leg or a layup, we have other adjustments that we put in. So there are a couple other adjustments that go under R&R and fairway. So let me pull it out here. So when we have this, we have an L adjustment in the fairway, and then also under recoverability and rough. Okay, and then it's important to know here that the fairway adjustment, the L adjustment, applies to that specific fairway value. And you might have two fairway values, but we don't automatically apply the L to both. It only applies to the specific one where we are laying up or we have the dog leg. Whereas the R&R applies regardless. It just is on there. And then reading through this was interesting as I learned something when I was preparing for this. It says here that this L adjustment for R&R is shot specific, meaning that if a player lays up off the tee and then has to lay up again in a subsequent landing zone, the rater would apply two L-1 adjustments for a total of -2. So if we go back to our form 1, here we said we have a dog leg, so we're hitting less than a full shot, which is why we're triggering this L or this layup adjustment. We're going to have an L for R&R. So that's going to go fairway L minus. And then at that point at 170 yards, we're going to measure the width of the fairway, and let's say it's 33 yards. So we'll have 33. And then what I typically do instead of putting the adjustment down here is because it is shot specific, I'll tag that adjustment right to this number here. So when I go back and I know that L- only applies to this 33, because if I have another shot, which I won't on this hole, but let's say I had another shot, another landing zone, and my fairway value was 25. This is going to be a bigger value when we look it up in the table. So the L, but I don't apply the L- to this number because my layup was on this shot where the fairway was 33 yards wide. Or the dog leg, sorry.
Hey, Kyle, Matt here.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit? You said you apply a rough and recovery. I don't quite follow that logic. Is it just normal? Why is that? What's the deal with the rough and recovery?
Yeah. So when we're looking at rough and recover, recoverability, we're looking just at, in general. There is some assumed recoverability when we're hitting shots down the hole. So basically, all this is saying is that because we're hitting a less than full shot, we are assuming that the recovery is going to be easier in that case. So another way to think about it is that if I'm hitting, iron off the tee versus driver, the stuff that I have to recover from in the rough is not gonna come into play as much because I'm hitting a shorter club. It should have more accuracy based on that accuracy pattern that we talked about. That's in the book as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right, so let's see here. So the other thing too, that I know other people have taught me that I think is helpful when we're looking at dog legs, whether it's plus or minus, it's really important once you get to where your landing zone is, where you think the golfer can get to, that you look back to the tee and make sure that you can get there. There could be times where, you know, you think you can get to a certain point and then you look back and there's a big tree that's blocking you getting there, or that maybe is completely preventing the golfer from getting there because they're not going to be able to hit it through or over the trees. So it's always important to look back when you get to your, where you think your landing zone is going to be, to look back and make sure that the golfer can hit a straight shot back to the tee wherever your golfer's teeing off from. Okay, so let's talk about a minus dogleg adjustment here. So let's just assume that this picture here, we're still hitting from this tee here, and all this stuff here is, let's just say it's not tree, it's just swamp. So we can go over it, clear it without any problem. So what we need to do to figure out what the adjustment is basically to find this point and the point out in the fairway, wherever it's going to be, that is the distance that we're supposed to hit it. So let's just say that we're doing the male bogey player. In this case, the male bogey player hits it 200 yards off the tee. So we are basically saying that this distance, that was a terrible line. I need to redo that. This distance here is 250 yards, or sorry, 200, as we're doing the bogey player, bogey male player. So then what we need to do to determine the adjustment is we're going to measure from here, from our X, where the ball ends up, to the middle of the green. And then if this distance we say is 120, and then we go and we look at our Form 1, and we say that, oh, we're supposed to be, second hole here, we're supposed to be at 150, but now we're at 120. So now that means that we've cut 30 yards off the length of our hole. So on our Form 1, we would write in minus 30 for dogleg. And we'd have our L minuses just like we did, or sorry, we would not have our L minuses here. That's an important point, because whenever we have an L minus, we're assuming that we're hitting less than a full shot. And in this case here, I'm still hitting that full 200-yard shot off the tee. So in this minus example, I don't have an L minus adjustment.
Kyle,
Yeah,
one thing in your example there, I might want to remind them is they have to be able to clear whatever that area is out there, whether it's a swamp or just,
right.
you know, rough in that. So they, you know, you need to take into consideration the landing area.
Correct. Yeah. That's a good point, Ken. So basically what he's saying there is that because we hit it 220, we carry it 180 in the air. So if this point is, it needs to be at least when we get past it, we'll probably actually a little bit farther up, because we need to go 10 yards beyond the edge here. But once we get 10 yards beyond the edge, if that point isn't, if it's, you know, more than 180, then we can't take this line and we might need to come farther back this way. So we do need to make sure that we can actually get to this point, not only from a, you know, clear visibility standpoint without any interference from trees or things like that, but also that we can actually carry it, the swamp in this example here. Yeah, great point there, Ken. All right. Any questions about doglegs before we get into layups? No, okay. Yeah, so there was a good question about the swamp there. If we did have if we did carry the swamp, we would have a crossing adjustment that we would need to do for that, and that's a different obstacle that we'll talk about. But that would fall in that example. If we were cutting the corner here and cutting the swamp, we would have a crossing adjustment that we would handle for that as well. Okay, the last thing about a dog leg that I want to just put out there before is this last point here, where we need to put a value of 0 if the dogleg correction is less than plus or minus 10 yards. Okay, so it needs to be at least 10 yards plus or minus for us to record a dogleg. All right, and then, so now we're going to go into layups. So we talked about the definitions of layup last time. So we have a forced layup and a layup by choice. So we'll start with the forced layups. Again, it's when there's a severe obstacle or a combination of severe obstacles, such as penalty area, deep bunkers, extreme rough, or severe topography that crosses the fairway or reduces the normal landing zone width to less than 15 yards for men or 13 yards for ladies. And as a result, the scratcher bogey player will hit less than a full shot. And then we must make the correction because the effective length of the playing hole has been increased. And then when we do have a forced layup, we generally assume that they lay up 10 yards short of the obstacle. However, a downslope may make it necessary to lay up more than 10 yards short of the obstacle to stay safely short of trouble. And then last thing here, in terms of forced layup, before we get onto an example, is that we do not evaluate roll on a layup shot or anything less than a full shot. So if I have a shot, if I'm hitting to a downhill lie where my ball's gonna roll out 20 yards, but I'm still laying up, I'm not gonna have a roll adjustment in that case because I'm not hitting my full shot. The roll adjustment only applies to a full shot. Okay, and then we have our layup by choice, which again is different. And again, there are specific circumstances where this happens. We don't do this a ton, but when there is a significant obstacle or a combination of obstacles near the normal landing zone, that results in a scratcher bogey player choosing to hit less than a full shot, a fairway landing zone that is less than 15 yards wide, but without severe obstacles, may be sufficient reason for a player to layup by choice. And a layup by choice will normally be employed in course management, often by scratch players, but not necessarily, but typically scratch players. And then in order to qualify, it's important that it says here the normal landing zone must present an unpleasant situation. There's a couple examples they use: downhill stance to an elevated green. And that's because the player has a choice as to whether to lay up in this situation or they could play a full shot. And when we do a layup by choice, we aren't going to put the layup in the form 1. We will make the correction to the approach shot lengths, which I'll show you here in a second. All right, so we talked about this with doglegs, and very similar to layups. We're going to, as Mike Brady said, make sure that we adjust the green target value as well to accommodate the effective or new approach shot length. So let's go through an example on this form 1 here of a layup. So we have here, and I think I've got a picture somewhere here. So here's a hole that the tee is back this way here, and we're hitting out to here, and this is the green that we're hitting to. So our tee shot would normally go right into the creek here. And this is a obstacle that's going to force us to lay up. So we're going to pick our layup point, or we're going to figure out where we can lay up. It needs to be 10 yards. Remember, we said that they normally are 10 yards short of the obstacle. So we're going to say about 10 yards from this direct line here is going to be, let's just say right here. So we've got our point, and then now we're just going to figure out how far we are from the middle of the green. And then we're going to make our adjustments on our form 1. So when we go to the form 1, let's say let's do this on hole 4, just so we have an open column here. When we have a layup, we're going to, let's say we're doing for the scratch player, we're going to, just scratch players on the left, we're going to cross out our approach shot, and we determine, because that's going to change, we determine that the layup is 23 yards longer than what we normally would have had. So our new approach shot's going to be 168, 145 plus 23. And then under the forced layup here, we're going to write 23 in here. So a lot of times when we do these, we'll try to make the math easy. So we'll use round numbers, or we'll use numbers based on what's listed here. Not necessarily 100% by the book to do that. You're supposed to get the exact yardage, but if it makes it a little bit easier, you can go ahead and do that. So when we do have our adjustments or our layup here, again, we're going to have our L adjustments. So we're going to have an L under R and R, L minus here, and then our fairway value, let's say we measure the fairway to be 30. And we'll have our L minus here for that. And then we'll need to reevaluate and look at this and make sure that's right. And you could do that. I think a lot of you know how to do that. If you don't know how to do that, we'll show you how to do that in an upcoming session. All right, and then let's talk through so the other thing that's in the book is that when we're talking about doglegs and layups, the largest value that we can put in the computer when we're putting the rating together is 50. However, we're still going to adjust our approach shot length to the actual amount. So maybe I have to lay up 70 yards from what I normally hit. I'm going to still adjust this approach shot value to be 70 yards longer than what's listed here. But in this section here for my layup, I can only put 50. If it's easier for you just to put the 70, that's fine, because our program won't allow anything over 50 anyways. So if you just want to put in the actual yardage up here, go for it. But if you do read that in the book and says it's a max of 50, that's kind of what we're talking about here. So let's say we have the same similar situation here, but this time our layup is by choice and not a forced layup. So again, we could have the same number where we say we're going to lay up 23 yards. So we change this to 168. Wasn't the best drawing, but 168. We're still going to have our L minuses because we're hitting less than a full shot. But in this case here, because it's a layup by choice, we do not put anything here. So there's no value that goes here. The one thing though, if you do have a layup by choice, and again, we don't do this a ton, but if we do have it, I definitely would recommend that at the bottom here, there's a note section that you put in. That you put in a little note here that says layup by choice, or however you want to do it, so that the captain who's looking at the sheets, or when we're looking at the sheets, we know that you just didn't forget to put the layup in the column here. Okay, and then the last thing, I know we're getting towards the end here, there's one more thing I wanted to cover in terms of this layup is there's a good little note in the guide that talks about when we have a combination of a layup by choice and a forced layup. We won't go through the example, but I encourage you to read this here, and I guess I'll just read it here, but just to think about it when you're out there, because this does happen, you know, more often than we probably actually do. So here it says that a layup may be part forced and part by choice. For instance, when a player is forced to lay up 25 yards because of a penalty area that crosses the fairway, but the rating team decides that most players would choose to lay up an additional 10 yards to play from the fairway as opposed to the rough. In this case, the additional 10 yards is layup by choice, but the correct length correction is plus 25 for the layup or forced layup on the form 1. But then the approach shot would be adjusted by 35 yards. So in that example here on our form 1, we would have our layup of 25, forced layup of 25. Jeez. And then this though would be 35, so it'd be 180. And again, that would be another time where you'd want to put a note at the bottom, because if I'm looking at this form 1 and saying they put 25 here and they got to 180, I'm going to think that the math was wrong. But if I see the note below, then I'll know that it was done appropriately. We still have the L adjustments here as well in this case. All right. Any questions? I know Hunter had one thing he wanted to go over really quick, but were there any questions about layups?
Kyle, when you're laying up by choice, is there any specific yardage that you would like to lay a player up to? For instance, I remember we were doing Birmingham Country Club, and there was a severe ravine or a hill that we were our full shot would have taken us over the hill, and I think after our discussions we said that, well, if you're going to lay him up, you should probably lay him up to a specific yardage that a player likes to hit from. For instance, maybe 100 yards rather than say 30 yards.
Yeah, so that's not necessarily the case there. We're not necessarily laying up players to like a certain stock yardage that they like to hit. What we could do in that scenario, and I forget the exact situation, but if 30 yards from the green was a severe upslope and presented a challenging neck shot to the green, whereas back 30 yards shorter is flat fairway, we might lay the person up by choice to that point to avoid that severe uphill slope. But we're not necessarily laying up by choice to a specific yardage just because I'd rather hit 100-yard wedge shot as opposed to a 50-yard wedge shot.
Yeah, okay, yeah, in this particular situation, the 30 yards would have put him close to the edge of the slope. But if you laid him back, if you laid him up a little further back, he wouldn't have had the risk of going over the slope. So that was the discussion that we had. Where do you lay him up? Do you lay him up close, or would you lay him up a little further back?
Yeah, yeah, and that's another good example of, one where you might have both. You could have a layup, a forced layup, and a layup by choice, a combination.
Well, he
Maybe.
still would have been in the fairway. It's just that
Okay.
once you get close to that slope, you could have a situation where the ball could roll, and then you would have an unpleasant lie on a slopey situation. So the discussion we had was, well, we would probably lay him back further to make sure he didn't have the ball didn't have a chance to reach the slope.
Sure.
So rather than laying him up, so we laid him back a little further.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So I guess that would be 100% layup by choice in that example there, and would be one where we, like I said, we don't use the layup by choice a lot, but typically it's a scratch player where they're trying to avoid a severe obstacle or a very awkward
Yeah.
shot. And a lot of
Yeah.
times those short downhill or uphill shots around the greens on par fives and things like that, those are good candidates for potential layup by choice.
Yeah, scratch golfers tend to have better course management than bogeys.
Yep.
Thanks.
All right. Any other questions? Hunter, do you want to?
Yeah. So just real quick before we tag out, something new that I'm going to kind of start doing this year. It's something that the USGA kind of started, doing with some of us. And so I'm going to, after the sessions complete each week, take the topics that we covered and then just throw it together in a short little form, like 4 or 5 practice problems to go with it. So especially for the new people, so you actually have the ability to kind of go in and kind of try to do the calculations on your own, especially when we get to the obstacles. There's not going to be a lot with this one, but so those we'll be sending out with the recording after the sessions are over.
That's great. And we won't publish results or anything like that. So there's no downside to taking them and trying to get the right answer. They're really just there to help you get better and improve. So appreciate Hunter for doing that. All right. Well, I know we went a little over. So it seems like maybe the hour is a little too short for these, but I think it was some good discussion, good questions. We'll stick around, or I'll stick around if there are any other questions that people want to ask. But appreciate you, being here. And then just FYI, we had a good suggestion from one of our newer folks about what we're going to be covering next week. So really, what we're doing is we're really just going from the front of the book to the back of the book. But next week we'll get into we'll talk a little bit about wind, and then we'll get into topography and probably fairway next week. So those are kind of the next items on the list for us to talk about.
Okay. Thanks, Kyle. Good discussion.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Leroy. Good to hear from you.
Yeah. I sent you a note. You can ignore it. You probably see it on your email. Thanks.
Okay. Yep.
Kyle,
Yeah,
hey, the things that Hunter's going to do up for us, those little quizzes,
mhm.
are those going to be, where are we going to find those?
So we'll send it out in an email.
In an email to each one of us, right?
Yeah,
Like
yep,
Jeannie,
yep,
like Jeannie used to do?
right, yep, yep.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay, good.
we'll probably put it on the volunteer page as well. But yeah, we will email it out for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.